All right. Well, thanks for coming. We'll get kind of started. I've got a couple of housekeeping things. I've met, I think, several of you over the years. My name is Mike Osmelson. I'm a civilian trainer at the BCA. I work on the echarging program, mostly with DWIs, search warrants, and then before that, I was with the State Patrol for 35 years. So one of the things that I'm going to do is pass around a post roster. This class is approved for 2 post hours. There's 2 lines for each of you. And if I could just ask this, in addition to putting your department on the first line, right below that, I want your work email address, and please print it as legibly as you can, because what I'll do is I'll use your email address. I'll send you a copy of the PowerPoint that I use, and that way if there's a slide or two where you think, well, I'd like to jot that down, you can, but just know that I'll be sending you that PowerPoint presentation in the next couple days. So I'll start this in the back, just let it work its way around, make sure your post number gets on there. And even though it's a post roster, for those of you that don't have a post license, please sign, so like ladies in front, please sign it as well. Just draw a line through the post number. So again, 2 hours post approved. The sergeant was asking, how long does this course, this class, usually go? It's scheduled for 2 hours, 2 hours post approved. But depending on the number of questions, if we don't take a break, probably around the hour 35 or so, hour 40 mark. If you want to take a break, it's your decision. But unless somebody sort of says, hey, we need a break, I'll just plan to kind of work straight through. Does that work for you? As far as what time we get out? And questions, ask them at any point. Just interrupt me wherever I'm at. We'll get it answered. If I've got a slide that better addresses it downstream, we'll cover that. So one of the acknowledgments is the obvious, and that is that in a group like this, there's lots of different levels of experience. Some probably arrested a lot of DWIs, others not so many. Some have probably processed search warrants already through echarging, others never have. And I won't ask for a show of hands, but just sort of an acknowledgement and a little bit of an apology that for those of you that find some of this information old news, I'm sorry. Some of it will, I know, be review for some of you. But my goal, and it's a very sincere goal, is that when you leave here, around 1600 or a little before, that you won't be able to say that it was a complete waste of your time. That hopefully something that I cover will be a clarification of what you know, or maybe some new information. Some of the things about criminal vehicular operation and homicide are kind of new, where some legal minds have come together, not me, but some people that really understand the law and things about the lab and testing. And so some of that might be new, or at least I'll be able to explain, here's why the recommendation is to do CVOs in a certain way. So again, hopefully everybody will learn something. This class has become, fairly popular, and it kind of happens where I'll be talking with an agency, there'll be a user issue or a point of confusion, and I'll just throw out, hey, would you like this class? It's free. Set it up whenever you want to do it. The feedback's been really favorable, and I've provided it all over the state, several in Metro. I think last month was Alex PD, a couple days in Crow Wing County, Morrison County. So I hope that that's your experience, that you'll find some value in what I've covered. One of the things that I do say about echarging that is also very sincere is that every time you use it, whether it's to process a DWI, a search warrant, criminal complaint, you should always be able to walk away from it and say, that thing works perfect. And if you have anything less than perfect performance, any glitch at all, make sure you tell us. And I develop, sort of relationships over email where people just send me stuff direct, right? And that's perfectly fine. I welcome that. But if you're not sure who to go to at the BCA service desk contact info is on the login page. Contact the service desk, send them an email, leave them a message at 3 in the morning, and I promise you that somebody will get back to you. If it's a DWI issue or search warrant, it'll probably be me. If it's something else, it'll be somebody else from that team. So this has been a real success story. It kind of starts, interestingly, with Jeff Bean, Elk River PD. He was the first deployment guy. I took his position, and agencies and officers have been trained all over the state. So I just did a federal grant report, and just shy of 28,000 DWIs processed through echarging. That's voluntary. And in that same 12-month period, we've dried up paper. we're down to about one paper DWI a month out of that 28,000 annually. So it's been a real success story because cops and deputies, troopers like it because it works so well for them. And so again, the state doesn't require it to be used. It's just been that kind of a success story. So thanks for that. And just a little trivia. I was telling Sergeant Clark on the way up here, I was coming up Highway 10, coming into Elk River, and I thought, God dang it, it's been 43 years ago that I met my third field training officer at the Elk River PD when it was down at the Highway 10 in Maine. Dick Berg was this station here was part of West Metro, which is where I was assigned. So it seems like 5 years ago, and it's like, what happened? It's gone. All those years, they just flew by. So anyway, just as sort of a reminder and overview, some maybe have never really gotten too familiar with echarging, but echarging is this secure statewide system. I don't know of another state that has anything like it, where all of the criminal justice players are connected through the same system. Judges, prosecutors, court personnel, peace officers, record staff, everybody's connected. And these are the things, of course, that are processed. Criminal complaints, every criminal complaint has to be sent through echarging. DWIs and search warrants, which we'll talk about today, most of the time. Incidents can be routed to prosecutors from agencies. All of your citations, no matter who your citation vendor is, everything goes through echarging to get to the state court. And then I'll spend a little time talking about criminal vehicular operation and why it is so important that you want to at least be aware that there's an application in echarging for those sort of heart-wrenching crashes. So just a really quick down and dirty overview of the DWI law to set the stage. Kind of DWI law 101. And the DWI law is incredibly complex. I think you could win an argument if you were to say DWI law is the most complicated law in Minnesota statute. You'd probably be able to win that. When you think about the law itself, it's really quite simple. It just says you can't drive or operate any motor vehicle if you're impaired, under the influence, over .08, or have a Schedule 1 or 2 controlled substance. That's the law. And yet we've reached the point where an entire chapter, a whole chapter of statutes have been devoted to just the driving while impaired laws. And it's complicated because you, of course, you're responsible to process a criminal arrest. That's enough work on its own. 4 degrees of crime, misdemeanor through felony, 4 through 1st degree. That's a lot on its own. But then you're also responsible, depending on circumstances and record and so forth, to carry out separate civil actions against the driver's license, their plates, the vehicle itself under the forfeiture law. So lots of things happening in 2 separate courts. And of course, criminal, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, it's your local prosecutor, city or county attorney. People go to jail and are fined. And of course, on the civil side, most of that is handled by the Attorney General's office. Preponderance of the evidence is the burden of proof. Very, very different. So sometimes record staff will go, oh, now I understand why the same officer gets 2 court notices on the same DWI arrest. I get it. So you've got your foot in 2 different camps. And the analogy that I've used, training rookies over the years, State Patrol rookies, say, think about filing your taxes. Of course, we're coming up to that season now. When you file your taxes, whether a tax preparer does it, you sit down in a program like TurboTax, it's probably a single task. You do it all at once. One feeds information into the other. But they're 2 separate processes, right? Federal, Minnesota revenue. So you could have a real problem with an IRS audit, get jammed up bad, and have no problems at all with the state of Minnesota, and vice versa. They're connected, but they're very, very separate. The same is true with DWI. And the reason I say that is maybe once or twice a week, I'll hear from a peace officer saying, hey, my prosecutor's dumping the DWI charge, not happy with the stop, or whatever. What do we do with the e-charging event? Well, nothing. You let it ride. That test result is still reportable under the civil implied consent law. What your prosecutor does on the criminal has no bearing on what happens on the civil side. And the opposite is true. If the Attorney General's office loses an implied consent hearing, it has no impact on the criminal DWI charge. They're connected, it's a single arrest, but very separate paths. And of course, The DWI laws are enhanced. They're aggravated by three basic aggravating factors. The three basic ones, of course, are: is there a prior in the past 10, conviction, or DWI revocation? One, you can't double count, of course. That's one aggravating factor. The other one is, of course, a child in the car, and then the last one is a test of more than double the legal limit, 0.16 or more aggravating factors. Those are the three basic ones. Of course, the more aggravating factors, the higher the crime, the more sanctions. But there's other factors that come into play too. If the driver has that use of alcohol or drugs invalidates license restriction, that adds consequences. If they're canceled ifs, obviously that does as well. And then if they've ever had a felony DWI conviction, either first degree DWI or alcohol or drug related CVO or homicide, those are life terms. I mean, in other words, take an 18-year-old driver that injures or kills a passenger in a rollover crash. They're convicted with CVO or CVH. 35 years later, they're stopped for their first DWI arrest. Boom, automatically a felony. Automatically goes up to felony. So, and I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it's just a down and dirty refresher. You know, your fourth degree DWI, misdemeanor, no aggravating factors, just brand new offender, and typically loss of driver's license. Add a refusal, add one aggravating factor, boom, now you're already up to a gross and plate impoundment, and so on and so on. The more aggravating factors, the higher the crime. First degree is different. It's not based on aggravating factors. It's always based on priors. 3 or more priors in the past 10, again, that could be a conviction or the DWI revocation. 3 or more of those, that next DWI is a felony. And you all know this, I'm sure, that once a DWI felony, always a DWI felony. And again, that includes that criminal vehicular operation or homicide, if it's alcohol or drug related. So then, of course, the law goes on to say, and I think this goes back to maybe 93, it's a gross misdemeanor crime to refuse testing. Whether it's breath, blood, or urine, you refuse testing, that's an additional gross misdemeanor crime. So what's reportable to the Department of Public Safety under the implied consent law? What do records staff have to publish off to Department of Public Safety? Pretty simple. Any test refusal, any refusal is reportable. Any test failure is reportable. And any test failure, of course, the one that everybody knows, 0.08 or more is a failure, 0.04 or more if it's a commercial vehicle, and then any presence of a Schedule 1 or 2 controlled substance other than marijuana or THC. In fact, I just responded to a question from an agency, the records managers, how come I can't publish this? Well, the officer correctly said, it's not one of these, so there's nothing to report. Public safety can't take any action against that driver's license. So this, of course, encompasses a lot of DWIs, but you all come upon many drivers that are impaired by things other than 0.08 or more or Schedule 1 or 2 controlled substance. Things like antidepressants, marijuana, anti-anxiety drugs, dust off, the huffers, like Duluth PD had a fatal driver took Ambien to help him sleep. Next thing he knows, he's in a fatal crash. Doesn't remember anything before the crash. So there's those other extremely impairing substances, but they don't rise to one of those per se levels under the implied consent law. So what about those test results? They're not reportable. The records manager has to archive those DWIs. Nothing gets reported. Now, the DWI crime, of course, that charge lives on. And if your prosecutor gets a plea to that or a conviction, Sherburne County Court sends the conviction to public safety, and then, based on the conviction, the driver's revoked. Often, months later. Not that more immediate revocation from a test failure or refusal. That makes sense? Old news for many of you, I realize. So just a little history to kind of get to where we're at today with this requirement to obtain a search warrant for blood or urine. And I know this is getting to be old news, but because we're talking about October of 2015, but for some officers, it's still new. I still talk with officers who say, I arrest a lot of drunks, but I haven't yet had the one that involves the search warrant and the drugs. So to take you back, October of 2015, Court of Appeals rules in this case, State versus Trahan, that all of a sudden, the court says, if you peace officers want a blood or urine sample in a DWI arrest, you have to get it You have to obtain a search warrant to do that. Whoa, even on a misdemeanor DWI. I don't know of anybody that saw that coming except the judges. The judges saw it coming. I have a friend, John Rodenberg, who's a good friend, high school, when he was a prosecutor, he rode with me, and he went to the Court of Appeals. And when I heard this ruling, I was pissed. Our house is being remodeled. I'm living in our garage. Like, John, this is bullshit. And he kind of bit back. And he said, I don't like the ruling either, Mike, but it had to happen. He says it was inevitable. If I was on that panel, I'd have to rule the same way. It was kind of a slap in the face, and I read his comments and said, oh, okay, I get it. But in any event, big surprise for law enforcement. But that was an ugly period, because you guys were going out and obtaining search warrants as of October 2015. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled a few months later, April of 2016, 2 North Dakota cases combined with a Minnesota case, guy by the name of Bernard. Those 3 cases were heard, and the Supreme Court said for the whole country, blood or urine, got to get a search warrant. So I mean, it really is the law of the land, and probably will be for as far as any of us can see into the future. So in any event, you were going out and getting search warrants, getting the blood or urine samples, and the test results were coming back with extreme results, like Orono PD, 0.34 in injury crash, meth and heroin and cocaine, all these Schedule 1 or 2 controlled substances. We got calls all week long from agencies. We got our sample back. What are we supposed to do now with the DWI event? Nothing. There's nothing to report. The implied consent law did not provide for a search warrant leveraged test result, so all those drivers were not getting revoked. And what was happening a lot is well-intended prosecutors on the criminal side were often dumping the DWI charge for, and here's a common one, we had dozens of these documented for the legislature. They would get a plea to a felony drug possession charge, like, hey, you plead your guy to this felony possession and I'll shit can the DWI charges. Oh, okay. Well, that would have made, that negotiation may have made some sense prior to the Trahan ruling, but now those drivers have nothing on their record, nothing at all about that DWI arrest. So the next time they're arrested, they're a brand new offender. So in any event, ugly period of time. So law enforcement and the DWI task force and the County Attorneys Association, everybody kind of rallied together. And this gentleman here, his name is David Bernstein. He's a Minneapolis city attorney. He's the chair of the DWI task force, one of the finest people I've ever worked with, just a good guy. And he did most of the heavy lifting. He did most of the work at the legislature to get this law passed. But there were all the Sheriff's Association, the Chiefs Association, State Patrol Office of Traffic Safety, as I said, the County Attorney Association. Everybody was involved, but he really led the effort to go to the legislature and say, these higher court rulings have really impacted the DWI arrest process. Oh, and by the way, they have derailed the 2-track system that the legislature created back in 1961, and the courts have upheld since that time. So the legislature really did come to the rescue. So they created and passed 171.177, brand new law, and what it did is, if you look at the left side of the screen, this is kind of what was. It was comparatively simple. You remember this, everybody got read the implied consent advisory. Whether you were going after breath, blood, or urine, everybody had the right to consult with an attorney. Well, after the law went into effect, July 1 of 2017, nothing changed on breath except the name of a form. It's hard not to call it the implied consent advisory, but it's not. It hasn't been since July 1 of 17. It's the breath test advisory. Drivers still have the right to consult with an attorney. The big change, of course, was blood or urine. And so no longer was there an advisory, no longer was there a right to an attorney. Just a straight search warrant for blood or urine, and that was the big change. Thanks to the legislature, refusing to provide blood or urine from a search warrant is now, again, a crime, a gross misdemeanor crime. And not terribly different from what the old language was. The new language is the driver has to refuse both blood and urine in order for it to be a refusal under the crime or under the implied consent law. So once again, test refusals and failures, all of them were reportable to Department of Public Safety for driver's license revocations. So with the exception of blood or urine in the search warrant, it kind of put the deck back to the way it was. So as of that date, as of that date, the message to law enforcement that we've tried to send is anytime, there's a couple exceptions, but anytime you arrest a driver for DWI, the first thing you should do is open up a DWI event and e-charge it, even if you're going after a search warrant. I'll kind of show you why there's benefits to that. Unfortunately, there's exceptions to everything, and unfortunately, we have a few here. And the exceptions to that rule, and I'll get into this more later, but if you're processing a criminal vehicular operation or homicide investigation, don't open up a DWI event. We'll get into that later. If you've taken a sample due to exigent circumstances, the result's not reportable, so don't bother opening up a DWI event. There aren't a lot of these, but the typical one is rural Minnesota, deputies at the emergency room with the impaired driver, the helicopter's outside, and the deputy's going, hey, even with how quick search warrants can be processed, I don't have time. They're going to start putting things in that body. If I don't get blood now, it's not going to be possible. So there's a few of those, and that's the right thing to do. You've got the evidence for the crime, it just doesn't get reported under the implied consent law. And then, unfortunately, and I just talked with the major from the DNR this morning, off-road recreational vehicle DWI arrests, there's less than 200 a year. So in the big scheme of things, they're not that common. But if you're the one that arrests the ATV operator, snowmobile operator, or watercraft operator, it's still paper forms that the DNR provides. Those are the exceptions. So we're not talking many, but there are those exceptions. So one of the questions that, in that law, before it even went into effect, there were peace officers that were like pissed. Like, what's this bullshit that a driver can refuse a search warrant? Where's that right come from? They're saying, hey, if I go to somebody's house, refusal's not an option. We're going in the house. So why do they have that right on a DWI? And the legal answer is they don't. There is no right to refuse a search warrant. So let's just say a chief or a sheriff could have a policy. It would be misguided, but they could have a policy that says, we're not going to accept refusal. If the driver doesn't want to give a blood sample, we'll take it with force. And agencies were, during that ugly period of time after Trahan, there were many agencies that were doing that. State Patrol was one. That there was the legal authority to take blood, even on a misdemeanor, with force. But what the legislature did is they listened to law enforcement. Because the law enforcement group said, legislature, contrary to what you might think, we don't want to do that. We don't want to have use of force complaints, bring a needle into a fight, have officers stuck with a dirty needle, workers' comp problems, and the list goes on. And then try to find a nurse that's even willing to participate in that process. So what the legislature did is they listened to the cops, and the legislature really has said to the driver through the law, more diplomatically, but what they've really said to the driver is, driver, if these peace officers wanted to hold you down and take blood with force, they have the complete right to do that. They could, but they probably won't. Instead, you don't want to cooperate and give a sample? No problem. We charge you with a gross misdemeanor, and you'll lose your license for at least a year. Much, much more civil, low-risk way of getting the job done. That's what law enforcement wanted. But the law also was made very, very clear, just confirming what's been done for decades. And that is that in the last subdivision of that law, it makes clear that if a driver's suspected of violating alcohol or drugs, CV, or homicide, a test may be taken despite their refusal. So they're saying, the law enforcement is saying, and the legislature is saying, there are those higher crimes when, okay, now we want to use that legal authority and take blood with force if necessary. We'll talk more about that in a bit. So again, no real changes on breath testing, but I want to show you just a couple of things. Any questions before I move forward? Okay. So I'm going to go into the test site. I've got a DWI started just in the interest of time. So I'm logging in as an imaginary officer of the Elk River PD. So here's the DWI that I started, and it's for breath. So just a quick review, and maybe for record staff that have never seen the process. So the officer looks up the driver, and the driver's information, the photo comes back, they select the driver, provided there's no fictitious names and so forth. They answer the felony DWI question with yes or no, they advance with next. And then of course that's the breath test advisory, where the advisory is read verbatim, the responses are recorded, and so on, and the peace officer advances with next. They then fill out the vehicle details page. This has already been done in the interest of time. I'm just going through the peace officer certificate page, and then the vehicle details page. And ultimately, they get to the incident details page. So here the officer is going to, of course, enter the case number. I'll do this as quick as my keyboarding will allow. Come on. So we'll enter a case number, the date and time of the arrest, and this is a new feature that went into effect, I don't know, maybe 3.5 weeks ago, something like that. And I want to just comment on it. It used to be that you would just pre-text the location, the city or township, and the county. It didn't take very long. But now what you're asked and semi-required to do is to click map location. If you're a municipal officer, like we are in this setting, it'll hover, it'll zoom in over the city of Elk River. If you're a county deputy, then it'll cover over your county, state patrol. They have to zoom in more. It'll be multiple counties in their district. So we zoom into Elk River, and we go to wherever it is that we've made this DWI arrest, and we simply do a mouse click, wherever it is. Okay, I guess I didn't click it part of that. So what happens is, and I know on the back it's hard to see, but it displays a location. It populates the city or township and county. But the most important thing is it locks into the latitude and longitude of the stop. There's a sizable number of the DWI arrests, like 30% or more, that never make their way to this mapping tool called the DWI dashboard. It's a pretty amazing tool that's available to all of you that have a MyBCA account. It's like a pin map for DWI arrests. You can sort, you can see where your arrests are compared to your crashes, where are your bars. You can narrow it down to underage drinkers only, males, female. There's quite a bit of sorting that you can do, but so many DWIs were not making it there because the locations entered by the peace officer made complete sense locally. Like if you're in Dakota County, 42 and 3 means something. To a geo map, it means nothing. Or Cub Food parking lots, or Super America driveway. So the prize in this step is capturing the lat and long. And so, and this is, I just randomly picked this. This is an example where the location given is not real good. So, but I'm gonna click OK. And most of the time, it's going to put in a location that you're probably going to be happy with. It'll identify the cross streets at that particular intersection. This one says Route 199 at milepost 0. I can just overwrite that to something that makes more sense locally. But again, the beauty is that the lat long is plotted. So when you come up with, and especially, when you're working with others that have not been, weren't here today, when they go, that's a pain in the ass. It comes back with locations that aren't really recognizable. So yeah, but there's really not any extra work. You'd have been filling that location field out anyway, but the lat long in the background is the prize, if that makes sense. So the location is plotted. We'll answer whether there was a child in the car or not. And then 1 to 2 minutes, this is old news for most of you, I realize, but 1 to 2 minutes after your breath test has been, it starts to print. When your test record starts to print, that's what tells the instrument, send that information off to the BCA in St. Paul. And that's when echarging talks to that system, and you can click get breath test results, and you select your test, and then you import it. So 3 mouse clicks, and you've entered all the information about the test, the breath test operator, and their department. And the other big deal, I think it's kind of a big deal, is you've also attached an evidentiary copy of that test record. And that saves the record staff from having to do that at a later time. So it's a feature that we want to work, but once in a while, an officer will click that, or a deputy or trooper will click that button, and they go, this is bullshit, where's my test? If that happens to you, you don't see your test listed, just hit cancel, maybe give it another minute and try it again. But if you try it again and it's not there, just move on. Yeah, you'll lose that attachment feature, but it's not, there's no point in waiting because there's nothing you can do about it that night. All you have to do is enter 5 things. The result, the date and time, first and last of the operator. That's it. And the reason that I say move on is because 90% of the time when that marriage between the two systems doesn't work, it's because the breath test operator has entered an incorrect arresting agency ORI. Either they've entered theirs by habit, or even if they're, and it shouldn't be this fussy, but it is. Instead of like MN 0080100, if they enter 1,000 instead of 100, just 2 digits, it won't happen. So that's why operators, breath operators are really, encouraged. Be very, very careful about entering that lengthy number. And we beg the breath unit, God, please get that vendor to use a drop-down list so it's not that fussy. Sir?
Yeah, back to that mapping thing.
Yeah.
I saw that you did it on a street. What if we got them out on a lake or snowmobile trail? Can you do it off a roadway?
Actually, that's actually a very good point. So, yes. So, I'll edit the location. There we go. The mapping tool in the live site, the production site, is a lot faster than the driver in this test site. I don't know why, but the developers say, yeah, it's kind of slow sometimes. So let's zoom in, and here's a body of water over here. So let's say that you make a DWI arrest. I don't know. We'll just pick the middle of the lake. And that's not a perfect example because if it's a boat, you wouldn't be using echarging, but just for purposes, so you can see that the location field is blank, but it grabbed the latitude and longitude. So that's good. Now that DWI will be plotted exactly where you said it occurred. You click OK, and middle of lake, whatever. So no problem. Yep, good question. So I think enough said on the breath import, unless anybody has a question. So then, of course, the officer advances with next, and this next page is one that you guys, I'm sure, just smoke right by, and rightfully so. There's nothing to do on that page, but I do point it out because a lot of the, and I like getting the questions. They're never a bother, but a lot of the questions I get, an agency will call up and say, hey, how come echarging generated a forfeiture notice? We can't figure that out. It's no problem, we answer the question, but if you go to this page, it tells you exactly what actions are being taken and then why. So let's say you're a brand new officer and you've got some jerk that's screaming about what right do you have to take my car. And you might be sitting there going, I don't know, I really don't know. Well, just look at this page, boom, you got it. Why is the vehicle being seized? Oh, sir, you have 2 or more DWIs in the last 10, that's why. So the officer doesn't have to go and dig into the law and try to sort that out. So again, just a reminder for your optional review, the officer advances with next, and in about 30 seconds fills out 6 different forms, plate impoundment, get the other plates that are registered to the offender. Minneapolis, all those plates, so now this friend's vehicle has to get W plates. The offender's other 2 registered vehicles also now need W plates. But Minneapolis PD had the record. They had a guy with 15 registered vehicles. And then John Combs, he's a really good guy. He's the chief deputy in Grant County, Elbow Lake. And he called maybe, I suppose it was a year ago. And he said, hey, Mike, one of my deputies arrested the most prominent farmer in our county. He's got 24 vehicles. None of them are registered at the farm. They're all registered to him. Sorry, John. 24 sets of W plates. But anyway, but the reason I wanted to leave this page up is there are going to be DWI driving a stolen car. They said, hey, what about the plates? Just skip the plate impoundment. You don't have to take those plates. Or let's say you stop a person in a government vehicle. They're in your turf for a conference, or they're passing through. You go, hey, sorry, got to arrest you, but we're not going to take the government plates. We're not going to take your car under the forfeiture law. So you can always bypass those actions if necessary. So we'll take this car. I'm spending more time than I really should on this breath DWI because there's not much that's new except that mapping piece. What's that? Well, thank you. And then the offender's invited to sign for receipt of the forms. Really kind of a stupid part of the process because many don't want to, and many times the signature pad doesn't seem to work.
Is there any way to get that form that they're gonna sign to show up when the signature pad is, when they're gonna sign it?
Yeah, in
Because
fact,
they're just
what I'll
signing
do is,
nothing.
what I've done, because there are those, legitimate people who go, hey, I'm not trying to be an ass, but what am I signing for? And so what I've done is, there's 3 forms that offenders are invited to sign for receipt of. And I've gamed up those forms where it says, like, today's date, your name here, your present location, and I'll send those out with that PowerPoint, so you've got them. And what some agencies have done is they laminate those, they've got them by the workstation, so you can say, this is what you're being asked to sign. Because bringing it up on the screen, it just doesn't, often not even save. So I'll send those out. Likewise, even though, and I've asked 2 different attorneys, one DPS attorney and one in the AG's office, is it not time to get rid of the signature part of the process? Because it really serves no purpose. So that's under review. But that said, until that happens, we provided all those signature pads. I've got a bunch of new ones if anybody needs one. But we want them to work. You know, if yours doesn't work, I've only seen 1 of 300 that has failed. It's almost always that the software hasn't been loaded into that workstation or hasn't been updated. So if yours isn't working, get a hold of the BCA service desk and we can work with your IT people to take a few minutes and get that done. So anyway, the forms are signed. We're gonna skip that, I missed a form. But anyway, it's automatically then routed to records and they do their thing. Any question on the breath test process? I took way too long on that, I'm sorry. Anybody? We covered that. Just real quick, have you ever heard of this thing called a 2-hour limit on your test? If you ever hear somebody tell anybody that there's a 2-hour limit, please correct them. And the reason I added these 2 slides is that I was coming across a good number of DWI events that were incomplete and like a month or 2 old. And when I was reaching out to the peace officers saying, hey, what happened? This thing never got completed, it's like half done. There were too many times when I was told, well, I ran up against that 2-hour limit, I didn't have my test yet, so I just kicked them loose and tagged them for something. That's not what the law says, and it never has. There is no 2-hour limit. It's a 2-hour protection. And just a quick, little history so you know where this came from. Years ago, it was a crime to drive, operate, or be in physical control at .10. So at the time of driving. So you would have a defense attorney bring in an expert, and they'd say, we don't disagree with your test of .14, but that's not what they were behind the wheel. Only in 07 will show that. And then all that alcohol that they drank before driving got absorbed while in your custody. So .14, who cares? Not guilty. And then the BCA would have to send an expert. The experts would argue about male versus female, body comp, Widmark formula, absorption, burn-off time, all that stuff. And so finally the legislature kind of said, we don't care. If you test .10 or more and it's within 2 hours of driving, that's the crime. We don't care what it was behind the wheel, immaterial. If it's in that 2-hour window, that's the crime. And it used to be that this language was separated out. When it got combined, I think it added to the confusion. But the law, it covers both things. It says it's a crime to test .08 within 2 hours of the time of driving or at the time of driving. So there's a Minnesota Supreme Court ruling that says a test taken 12 hours after driving was a good test. It's just if it's beyond the 2 hours, now the experts can come in and argue about what it might have been behind the wheel. So if you ever hear somebody say that, no, you might need more than 2 hours before you get that test. Maybe it's hit and run investigation. You don't find the driver for 4 hours, get the test. Okay, any questions on that? All right. If you do start a breath DWI, so your driver blows like a .03 and they're falling down drunk, go, okay, I guessed wrong, it's not alcohol, there's something else in the body. Use that same DWI. You leave the breath test advisory intact, you get your search warrant, you get your blood or urine sample, and then you just change the test type accordingly. You don't have to start a brand new DWI. For record staff, the question is, well, what is it that you guys want us to attach to the DWI? Well, it's really pretty simple. The lab report and the breath test record. And if the system works like it should, and the peace officer does those steps that they should, those two should already be attached in a perfect world. Doesn't always happen, but they should be. Then the third item is the narrative report of the officer or deputy, or two if there were, two people working the stop. And then in a blood case, a PDF of the medical personnel certificate. That's all that's needed. Don't need driving record, don't need search warrant, don't need inventory, jail forms, tow sheets, none of that stuff is needed. Now, some agencies have said, Mike, everything we have is in a single PDF. You know what a pain in the ass it is to parcel out just those things that are on your list? It's like, oh, don't. No, you do whatever's easiest for you. If you attach a whole bunch of stuff because it's easier for you, no problem. These are just the minimum. We hope that you send that. And that way the Attorney General's office can be semi-prepared once they get a contested case. The other thing that happens, I'm sure you'll be shocked, but drivers evaluators, they have drivers come in and the driver says, well, according to this, Sherburne County deputy, A, B, C, and D. And the evaluator can look into your report, submit it through echarging and go, no, it's not true. So it's really helpful for their purpose in this process too. Okay, enough on attachments. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to move into a drug DWI. So you've now stopped a driver, and however you determine alcohol is not involved, or maybe it's a crash and you're restricted to the hospital, but breath is not going to be helpful to you. And so you want to go after a search warrant to get a blood or urine sample. So remember what I said before? The first thing that you want to do, and I have my email open, and there's a reason for that. Hopefully nothing inappropriate, kind of a joke or something comes through, but I'll show you why I've got that open in a bit. So you arrest this drug impaired driver. The first thing you do, click Create New echarging Form. And yes, if you could go right into the search warrant, but we really encourage you to start out a DWI event. And I'll show you why this is helpful. You click the DWI Forms wizard, and just like before, just like in the breath one, you look up your driver, you select your driver, you answer the felony DWI question accordingly, and you advance with next. And of course, that takes you to the breath test advisory. But we don't want breath. So we're going to check this box here where it says, if the breath test advisory was not read, check the box. And notice when I check the box, all of that advisory language disappears and I'm left with a reason box, mandatory. Notice what happens right below that box when I start typing in search warrant. It opens up a pathway to the search warrant application. So I'm going to take that path, I'm leaving the DWI, we'll come back to it later, and boom, it opens up a search warrant application. So we're going to first enter a case number and answer a question. Injury or death? Nope, just a traffic stop. One number, one mouse click, save and continue. notice that it brought over the driver information. One of the benefits of starting the DWI first. So what's the date and the time of your stop? What's the location? And the county, the city or township. Why'd you stop it? We'll say through red light. And we saw the person behind the wheel. And then it's a matter of using this drop down to pick right from statute. What do you think? What's your belief? Well, it might be alcohol in a crash, or in our case, we think they're under the influence of a controlled substance. Not sure yet what, but that's our belief. Now, facts forming the investigative belief is where you put the typical kind of 2 paragraphs. What drew your attention to the vehicle, or got you to this crash, and what's the description of the driver? And I had this feeling that I forgot something, and I was training the St. Paul PD Academy. I didn't update this to make it specific for today, but nonetheless, we're going to use this canned language. Just to fill the spaces. But this is pretty typical. This is why this particular vehicle was stopped. The only thing I would have changed is the date and the location to make it local. And then what are the behaviors that you've observed about the driver? That's all the judge really needs. Was there a lawful basis for a stop and probable cause for the arrest? There's not a whole lot that's needed. Now, I have seen some officers, like there's a Sergeant Graham, he's hell on wheels, St. Paul PD, and he's a DRE, and he's got a paragraph that he copies and pastes into all of his search warrant, and it's a little bit of a resume. How long he's been an officer, how long he's been a sergeant, he's a DRE, and that's fine. I mean, that's something that you may consider doing. I see that every once in a while, but basically it's just, why did you stop it? What did the driver display? Now, because this is a DWI warrant, search warrant, I should say, both blood and urine have been checked automatically. And you'll see that those 2 check marks convert that to the statement blood or urine in the application because of how the law is written. Location of test administration. We'll make that easy and say that it's a local stop and we're having a sample taken at the hospital. But this is a pretty powerful field right here. So let's say that your driver was flown to North. You could put in Hennepin County for the location and now have access to the Hennepin County judges. And that's happening all over the state. Northern Minnesota, they're applying for lots of search warrants in St. Louis County because of St. Luke's Hospital. Mayo, regions in St. Paul, north of Hennepin. It works extremely well. And sometimes we'll get calls from officers or investigators going, I want this signed by a judge in some distant county. I don't know what I did wrong because I've only got my own. This is the spot right here. Wherever that test is going to be administered gives you access to those judges. So in any event, where's the sample going to be taken? Now, nighttime search, we're in the daylight now, but because so many DWIs are at night, I'm going to check that box to show you that one check mark, that one mouse click, generates 2 paragraphs about why speed is essential, drugs and alcohol metabolize in the body, and so on. I'll show you that later. So that page is done, and it's my talking that took a long time. If you were doing this, it takes seconds, minutes, right? So you save and continue. And so you can see that we're taking evidence from a person. Here it is, blood or urine. The judges understand why it states it that way and where the search is going to take place. So we save and continue. Nothing to do here. Save and continue. And so now you can see that it took, I didn't write a lot of this. A lot of this is canned language from echarging. Like, you're a licensed peace officer, Elk River PD, state of Minnesota, and so forth. All I wrote, I entered the date and time, the location, through red light, saw a person. I just checked, some of those. So it puts it into a narrative format. And of course, here's the description that I did enter. The stop, information about the driver, observations. Therefore, you seek a search warrant to obtain blood or urine. If you see something in here you don't like, you can change it. Or maybe you want to add something like, according to witnesses, You can modify this all you want and then save and continue. Nighttime search has already been checked. Every DWI is marked for the judge as time sensitive automatically, and so we'll just save and continue. Most of this is just going through the pages. So then you get to the place where you're going to sign this under penalty of perjury. And so where are you signing it? In our case, it's easy. Sherburne, oops. There it is. Sherburne County. Same thing, that's what it would be even if you're sending it off to Hennepin or Ramsey County. That's where the search is done, but where are you signing it? Now, you do need to enter a callback number for the judge. They need a means to call you directly without going through it's hard to get to a peace officer in the jail at night, right? So, and that number only goes to the judge. It doesn't get saved on the search warrant. It doesn't get saved by BCA, just the judge. So you can be, that comfortable in giving a number that you maybe wouldn't give everybody else. So this is when technology ends for a moment. This is where you have to, of course, make phone contact with your judge. And I don't know what your system, like in Anoka County, it's one number and the judges pass around a cell phone. In Hennepin, you call a number and it goes to whichever judge is on call that night. Some places it's the jail, the dispatch center, I'm not sure, but you determine which judge is it that I'm trying to reach. Your Honor, sorry to wake you, I need a search warrant approved, and with very, very rare exception from what I've heard, judges have been pretty decent. They don't like getting woke up, but they know that it's not your desire. I mean, you're all stuck with the same thing. So once you've made contact with that judge, then you select the judge from what will be a longer list than this. We're going to select this imaginary judge, Ozzie, and all you need to do to sign and submit the warrant is to click sign and submit. And I'm going to take this all the way through so we get it from A to N. So now you can see that it went from a draft, it was pretty quick, but it went from a draft of a search warrant to one that's assigned to a judge. So what most peace officers tell me is, I just refresh my page every couple minutes, and the next thing you know, boom, there's my approved search warrant. So we're going to log out, and we'll log in as a judge. The judge logs into echarging just like you do, password or fingerprint, and the judge can see the search warrant that you've sent. It's marked as time sensitive, it's assigned to the judge simply clicks go to enter it. And the first thing the judge will notice is that you signed this search warrant application under penalty of perjury. If the judge is one that's sort of old school, wants to administer the oath, they can change that selection accordingly. And so now it's just a matter of the judge taking a look at what you submitted in the application. You're a peace officer, Elk River PD, et cetera, you want a sample of blood or urine, and here's the facts. Went through a red light, saw the person behind the wheel, and here's the information about the stop and the driver. Therefore, want blood or urine, okay, got that. And then that one check mark generates these two paragraphs. Why is it that speed is an issue here? Why the evidence is going to disappear if we wait too long? So you need that authorization to serve this after 2,000 hours. So boom, judges are signing these in about 60 seconds, and some people have said, well, I don't think they're actually reading it. I think they are. And maybe some don't, but I think they are. There's not that much to read. Is the stop good? Is there a basis for the arrest? Done, sign it. And so it's signed by the peace officer. The only thing that is not there is on the search warrant, more brief, a little bit more court-like language. The only thing that's missing is the judge's signature. And all the judge has to do to sign it is to click sign warrant. No password, fingerprint, nothing. And now, of course, it's going to go from a sign to the judge to a search warrant that's been issued. So the judge logs out, tries to get back to sleep, and at about now, I should be getting an email. There it is. Okay, this was assigned to the judge, and I get an email saying that it's been approved by the judge. I realize that most won't have email, but it's just one way that you can be notified that your search warrant has been approved. So we're going to log back in as a peace officer now, or we've refreshed our page, and bingo, we're gonna see there's our search warrant, and it's been issued by the judge. So notice something here. Here's the DWI that we opened at 14:42 hours. Notice in less than 1 minute, we're already in the search warrant application. So the DWI first going into the search warrant really doesn't slow you down much, and you make up for that in benefits, that less than 1 minute. So you do what the judge did. You go into the search warrant by clicking the go button. And this is as close as we can get to you executing that search warrant. So you're going to get a mandatory reminder. The reminder displays, you'll have to acknowledge it. This is going to be enhanced here in the next few weeks, hopefully, with some additional instructions. But this says, and this is right out of statute, at the time, emphasize that, at the time a blood or urine test is directed, not requested, not asked for or begged for, directed, the person must be informed that refusal to submit to the blood or urine sample is a crime. And the best, that David Bernstein I mentioned, he does the best job of anybody I've seen in explaining the best way to go about this. So remember that in order for the driver to have refused the search warrant, they have to refuse both blood and urine. But that doesn't, and I know this is old news for many, but that doesn't mean that you offer them the choice. No, you're in charge. And so let's say that you want blood. Because of the type of substance you suspect, you know that blood is going to be better than urine. Well, let's just make it real simple. It's an opposite sex driver. There are no other officers to participate. You go, to the degree that I can, I prefer not to have the urine sample and the complications that go with that. So don't mention urine yet. So the way that David Bernstein kind of explains it is how I like, it makes sense to me. It's real clear. Driver, I have a search warrant for your blood. Refusal to provide that sample is a crime. Give your arm to that nurse. Done. There's no asking. You have a court order. You're directing. And if the driver gives the blood sample based on that directive, then you've got your sample. You haven't had to talk about urine. Of course, if the driver says, no, I have a thing with needles, I can't allow a blood sample, then you got to start over. All right, very well. I also have a search warrant for your urine. Refusal to provide that sample is a crime. Here's the urine collection bottle, and here's my instructions for providing that sample to me. Now, if the driver gives you urine, consents to urine, that's your sample. Whether it's your preferred sample or not, that's your sample. You have to accept it. Then, of course, if the driver has refused both blood and urine, now you have a refusal. You go immediately back to your DWI, check refused, and now your DWI case is just like if they refused breath. All the forms are populated, forfeiture, plates, whatever applies. So you acknowledge this reminder. Now, I had one officer say, well, in our area, we were kind of told that we shouldn't give that advisory until after they've refused both blood or urine. So I don't think that's wise. That's not, you can't go wrong if you follow the law. The law says at the time a blood or urine sample is directed, then they're informed of that refusal as a crime. And the legislature made real clear. They said, and it was Senator Latz that was kind of the stickler on this. He's a defense attorney, and he said, look, we're not saying that you need to come up with a new advisory. It doesn't have to be word for word. All we're saying is if you're going to charge these drivers for a gross misdemeanor for refusing, just tell them that refusing is a crime. And you already do that in the breath test advisory. So it was kind of frustrating that ended up being a requirement, but the law wasn't going to pass without it. And frankly, I guess it's a bit of fair play. So in any event, you acknowledge that reminder by clicking continue, and now it's a matter of simply printing the search warrant application and the search warrant itself. And of course, you want to print as many copies of the search warrant as you need. One for the driver, perhaps one for the hospital, some ask for it. Make sure you keep a copy for your agency, because only peace officers and judges have access to search warrants. Prosecutors don't, and record staff don't. So you have to make sure you keep a copy of that search warrant for your agency. So here's the search warrant signed, application signed by the officer, Elk River PD, and then the search warrant signed by this particular Sherburne County judge. So again, you print that, however many you need, you close that PDF. Now, one of the things folks ask is, where can I find that receipt? You know, to document, I obtained blood, kit number, whatever. Well, there's a couple places. One is right here, download receipt form. It generates a fillable PDF, and you just fill in what evidence did you obtain, blood, urine, whatever it might be. The other place you can find that form is on the echarging login page. It shouldn't take this long to generate. I'm kind of at the mercy of a Verizon signal here, so sometimes it's a little slow. Okay. Any questions on the search warrant application, execution? So let's say that you did obtain your blood sample. You your driver to jail, you maybe write your report, take some other calls, whatever it is that you need to do. But we're really kind of pleading with you that before you end that shift, take the 3 or 4 minutes that it takes to update that DWI. And there's a couple reasons for that. So here's that DWI that we opened prior to launching into the search warrant app. So we click go to enter it. And I'll do this as quick as I can. We land on the last page that we were on. Where we have our search warrant, we're not taking that pathway again. We're simply going to advance with next. And we'll fill out the peace officer certificate. Whatever our observations are. Then we go to the vehicle details page. Say the driver is not the owner, look up the plate. And we advance with next. So that gets us back to that incident details page. And this is as far as we're going to go, but you're going to fill out pretty much almost all of it. So we enter a case number and a date and time of the stop, and we map the location. Sorry that this is, you won't see this in the live site. I think I mentioned that before. Shouldn't take that long to load. Picking bad locations, but in any event, the location is in, is there a child, yes or no, and then the date and the time of the blood sample being taken, the kit number, and the expiration of the kit. This used to be as far as the peace officer would go. At this point, you would save your work. But a little over a year ago, November of 2018, a change was, an enhancement was added. In the blood kits, of course, there's those paper sheets. In the urine, they're yellow, and they're a pain in the ass to fill out, right? All the information about agency, driver, case number, all that stuff that's already in your e-charging event. So the thought was, doesn't it make sense to save the officers some work and just use the information that's already in their DWI? All you have to do is answer a couple questions about the kit itself, and just consider how fast this is. It's a DWI arrest, the driver's alive, the kit's intact, the powder's present, sample was taken by R.N. Smith, breath test was given, yep, PBT was .000, we suspect drugs, and we think meth is being used, okay? Was a DRE involved? No, done. That's it. Those seconds are all that it takes to replace that paper kit sheet. If you did have a DRE assist you with your arrest and you answered that question with yes, then there's just one more thing to answer. What does the DRE think? What classification of drugs? And so once those questions have been answered, then don't forget to click send kit sheet information to the BCA lab. And you should get confirmation back, that nice gold bar at the top right of the screen. The kit information should upload successfully. And there it is, kit sheet information successfully sent to BCA lab. So their database is now populated. So they've won on this deal too, because instead of getting those lengthy sheets, difficult to read some writing, and trying to enter that into their database, you just did it. Everything that they need is entered. They wait for the kit to arrive, match the number with your information. It really, really works well. State Patrol piloted this thing for like 9 months, and it's worked well since it went statewide last November. But the key is that the lab needs to have you upload that before the kit arrives. When the kit arrives, if there's not an upload from an echarging event, they have no idea what to do with it, or even in some cases, who it's from. They don't have a driver's name. The last thing that you need to do, after you upload the kit sheet, then it's just a matter of either clicking next or save. The outcome's the same. We've been clicking next all the time, so click next again. And this is the other benefit of opening up a DWI event first. And that is that even in a blood or urine DWI, if there's enough circumstances to justify the seizure of the vehicle under the forfeiture law, echarging will tell you that. And so it tells you there's a vehicle forfeiture applicable here. If your agency policy is to take the car, all you have to do is click print preview. And it's going to generate the 2-page forfeiture notice and the 1-page property receipt. All you have to do is print those forms out, sign them. It's the only time anywhere in echarging that you sign something with a pen, because it's in the middle of the arrest. It won't be an electronic signature. That's more about a programming kind of thing. But in any event, you make a copy of that, of course, give that document to the offender saying your car is now our car. And there's the forfeiture notice, page 1, forfeiture notice, page 2, property receipt, all filled out, just needs your signature. So again, you would print those and serve that accordingly. When you're done with that, it's just a matter of clicking OK, and then that DWI stays assigned to you as the arresting officer until the lab testing is done. And so when that lab report comes back, and I'll talk more later about some notifications, but now you get notified that, okay, your lab report is back, and all you have to do then is to click go to enter the DWI, or use the link from the email I'll describe in a moment. That takes you back to the page you ended on, and then it's just like the breath test. You would simply click get blood or urine test result, and in this test environment, it lists several. It won't. In the real world, it'll be your report and your report only. So you will then select and import your lab report, and even if it's multiple pages, it's now attaching that entire lab report to your DWI. You can see that it's attached, and all of the information about the BCA lab is populated. And it just occurred, one thing occurred to me. And if it's an alcohol test, it'll populate that field for you, just like it does with breath. But in this case, we said that we were working with a controlled substance. If you're dealing with a controlled substance DWI, then there's 2 questions to answer. And I get calls once in a while from officers saying, I'm trying to answer the Schedule 1 or 2 question and it won't let me. You first have to answer the first question. Basically, it asks, is your lab report or your lab result back? And once you answer yes to that, it activates the second question. Was there a Schedule 1 or 2 found other than marijuana or THC? Yep. Advance with next. Or click yes, advance with next. Next again. And in this case, there's only 2 forms to sign. One's a little counterintuitive. It's basically signing a form saying, I didn't read the breath advisory. The other is the important peace officer certificate. And that's all that you have to sign for are those two forms. So one of the questions that comes up from time to time is, well, what about the revocation order? What about the plate impoundments? Blood and urine, it's always been taken care of by driver and vehicle services. You don't have to deal with that. So then the last step is to click next. And for most agencies, there's 231 agencies set up this way, an automatic routing to record staff. You want to automatically assign this DWI to Alberta Police Records, and then you, as the deputy or officer or trooper, just clicks yes. Boom. The assignment's made, and records will now pick it up and attach your report and so forth. The thing that occurred to me for a moment there is that you guys use the Tri-County lab, or is it now called Midwest? Sherburne County is Sherburne, Wright, and Oakland, right? So, if you're sending your sample to that lab, then there is no kit sheet upload. You'll still have to fill out whatever your county lab requires as far as a kit sheet. But if you're sending it direct to BCA, you would use that feature. Any questions on that? Anything? All right. Are we good to keep moving along, or do you want to take a quick break? Keep going? Yes? Okay. All right. Okay, so what connects the lab's system and echarging is the kit number. Remember in the breath test, it's the arresting agency ORI. Here it's the kit number. So when you enter that kit number, just like the breath operator, just be real careful that you enter it perfectly. If it's a digit off, those features that we just went through will not work. We talked about uploading this. If your sample's going to the BCA lab, you're alerted about the forfeiture notice. So you send off we'll just talk about BCA for right now. You send off your blood or urine kit to the BCA lab or to your own. That sample is analyzed, and at least with the BCA, you will get an email notice on the same day that your agency gets the lab report through email. So you get fed two different ways. Bottom line, and you can click on this hyperlink if you do get the email, and it takes you right to that page. But you go to that page and do what I just did a couple of minutes ago. Click Get Blood or Urine, select your sample, import it. And then the BCA lab has done a really good job of putting right on page 1, whether there's a Schedule 1 or 2 controlled substance present. You remember it used to be you'd have to go to the DEA site and look up the drug that they found as a positive finding, and what schedule is it. Now the lab does it for you. They still want you to look at the whole lab report, because I did see one where they missed this, but that's one out of hundreds. They really do a good job. Boom, Schedule 1 or 2 present, right on page 1. And of course, if you have that present, then you answer that Schedule 1 or 2 question with yes. And if it's one of these other substances, the Schedule 4, anti-anxiety, antidepressant, marijuana, then the answer to that question is no. And then record staff has no option except to archive it. There's nothing to report. The medical personnel certificate, it's still inactive, it's a valid form, and that should be filled out. The good news is you don't have to fill it out, the nurse or your phlebotomist does, and that in a perfect world, you turn that into your agency, they scan that into a PDF and attach it to the DWI event. And the reason I say perfect world is because it's not. And sometimes these don't get attached and life goes on. But ideally they do get attached because in theory this is your, say, nurses or your lab tech's court appearance, in theory. Okay? Again, that upload of information to the BCA needs to get there before your kit does. And the lab is rejecting kits that don't come in that way. In the case of criminal vehicular operation, off-road, recreational vehicle DWIs, you do need to still fill out those kit sheets because there won't be a DWI event to upload it from. In order to report a blood or urine test failure, just remember the driver has to have been, or refusal, has to have been informed that refusal to submit to that sample is a crime. That's right out of statute. Enough on that. Just kind of keep in mind, it's so easy to sign electronic forms and not realize what you're signing. But when you sign that peace officer certificate, you are signing that you either read the breath test advisory to the driver, or you obtained a search warrant and informed them that refusal to submit to a blood or urine test is a crime. That mostly fits one particular county in northwestern Minnesota where it's a mess. They're using consent to get the sample. I said, guys, you're signing a form that's not. You're signing a form that's not true. Don't get yourself jammed up. Just know what you're signing. If you didn't give that professional advisory, probably don't want to be signing that certificate. So it doesn't necessarily apply here, but that's why I have the slide. We talked about the receipt already, and if you use the drop-down list of available documents, there's a lot of different documents in here, like if you have a drunk that's carrying a firearms, you go, where's that firearms implied consent advisory? You can download that, the DNR forms, and one of the other forms is the search warrant receipt. That's the other place you can get one if you don't have one that your department prefers to use. Okay. Enough on the receipt. So after the search warrant is executed, we went through this. Okay, several benefits to following that. I won't beat that any further. Some search warrant highlights. They are gone after 60 days, and there is no way to get them back. So you need to make a copy for your agency. Echarging is not the repository for search warrants. The court is. So somebody from your agency needs to file that search warrant and the receipt with your local court. And again, it's gone from echarging in 60 days. If you have a whole bunch of search warrants, like, there'll be an investigator that might do 15 search warrants on the same case, and they'll call and say, how do I get rid of all this crap? They're already served. You can just archive those on your own. You change the word view to archive and click go, boom, it's out of your work queue, and then it's gone after 60 days. I mentioned that records and prosecutors don't have access. The last thing about search warrants is just make sure when you're using echarging that you only have one Internet Explorer window open at a time. I wish that wasn't the case, but sometimes an officer will open a DWI in one window and a search warrant in another, and I don't understand why, because there's no benefit to that. The way I did it, where you go from the DWI into the search warrant, you'll only have one window open, because when two are open, for technical reasons that are above me in understanding, those items get corrupted. And they're real hard for the developers to purge from the system, and the downside for the officer is that the work is gone. It has to be redone. We're like Marshall PD just had an officer a couple weeks ago. He left his DWI event open in his squad on the MDC, didn't log out, and then went into the jail, logged back in to a fixed workstation, and that isn't a problem. That's no problem, except DWI in the squad, search warrant at the jail, corrupted. Just hassle for him because he has to redo everything. So enough said on that, I think. We talked about has to refuse both, enough on that. The search warrant program Ohio is taking a look at it this coming week. Lots of interest from other states. How did you build that thing? Well, for those that did, it was almost a year-long project, but there was already the system in place. Judges were used to signing criminal complaints. Cops were used to going into echarging. For a state to take off from ground zero and build a network, I mean, it's a huge deal. But judges love this. Judges are pretty stoic, they don't say a lot, but they have gone out of their way to send notes and emails of appreciation. They love it, because they didn't like the officer having to come to their home, or like there was a female judge from Stearns County, and she said, I'm not having people come to my house, so I go meet the officers or the deputy or trooper at the local Perkins. Oh, now it's just convenient, boom, from their bedroom or their kitchen table, done. So I just ran this last night, I guess it was, or yesterday, over 31,000, roughly half of those are for DWIs. So I'm going to move into the criminal vehicular operation area. Any questions before I do? So it isn't that long ago that David Bernstein, Bill Lemons from the County Attorney Association, Lieutenant Morose representing the DREs, Stacy Bennett, the Assistant Lab Director, that they really kind of assembled and said, how do we best advise peace officers to process criminal vehicular operation and homicide investigations? Because I was saying, hey, from my perspective, it literally is all over the map. There's all kinds of processes being used. There's not a whole lot of uniformity. And so there was some agreement as to how this should be done. And I learned a little bit in that process too. So first of all, know your agency's policy. And by the way, there's the law enforcement liaisons like Bill Thomas, is yours Bill Thomas or is it Becky Putsky? But they either have or will be sending you an article. I co-authored it with Bill Lemons, kind of giving you here's what we recommend. Your department is in charge, but here's a recommendation, and that'll be in the Chiefs and the Sheriff's Magazine, MPPOA, be in the Troopers Magazine, to try to get everybody sort of on the same page for how do you process these. So one of the things everybody needs to know is, what's my agency policy? If I'm taking a blood sample from a driver that's killed somebody, and I'm suspecting criminal vehicular homicide, does my agency policy support the taking of blood with force? You should know that in advance. So that's one thing, but the law makes clear. The law gives you full authority to do that. We already talked about that subdivision. So this is kind of a change for some thinking. Not for many. I think State Patrol has always had a blood-only sort of policy, but in any event, just remember this. And this is the advice that you can do differently. Your agency can have a different decision, but the advice of that group of experts is if you're investigating a CVO or homicide, blood only. Blood only. You want blood. And I actually challenge, so what's wrong with urine if you can get it voluntarily? And the reason the lab explains is that with blood, you can get a quantitative number, how much of a substance is in the sample, where urine doesn't tend to provide that. Now, for your typical DWI, who cares? If there's a presence, that's all you need to prove. But if a driver has killed 3 other people, the prosecutor might want that level of detail. So blood is the way to go, and not urine, blood only. So there's a couple of differences, and we're putting in some advisories into echarging to help, and then hopefully not too far out, some of this will be automated to make it even easier for the peace officer. But so let's say that you're working this CVO or homicide investigation. That's one of the times that you're not going to open a DWI event. And the reason is, because in the end, the test result isn't reportable. Because you're going for blood only, not blood or urine. You're not going to give the refusal advisory. So you would create a new e-charging form, and instead of opening up a DWI, which you do for almost everything else, you go straight to the search warrant. Again, CVO or homicide. And once you get into the search warrant, you select that it's a DWI search warrant because that includes CVOs and homicides. And then you'll answer yes, somebody was killed or somebody was injured due to this at-fault driver. So boom, couple of mouse clicks and you're done on that page. There's only 2 things then that are different from what we went through as a group before. When you get to the page where blood and urine are automatically checked for you, uncheck urine. You don't want urine, okay? You don't want urine even mentioned in the search warrant. And that's the attorney's advice that I'm learning from. That's the advice of the prosecutors. You don't even want the word urine in your search warrant. It's blood only. And so you uncheck urine. And then the other difference is, when you get this reminder to provide the refusal advisory, until programming changes, you'll have to acknowledge it. Okay, I got it, but you're not going to give it. In a CVO, there is no refusal advisory. So then it's a matter of saying, driver, I have a search warrant for your blood, and consent or not, we're taking it. Real simple. And if the driver consents, good, and if they don't, then pursuant to your policy, you bring in some extra muscle and say, really, how bad do you want us to fight you? Because you are giving us the sample. Okay, any questions on that? But because it's blood only, because there's not the refusal advisory given, there is no implied consent law. It's out of play, it's gone. And that was a knowing sacrifice that was made when that law was passed. That we're going to sacrifice, get rid of the implied consent revocation for the bigger prize, which is blood in that felony level crime. Okay, any questions on that? Now here's the problem, and some of you can probably remember all sorts of examples of this. Here's the problem. So now you get blood from that driver, and you get a .27 alcohol, you get meth, cocaine, whatever the result is, it's not reportable, right? No implied consent law. So that driver that has now, let's say, killed mom and 2 children, they drive with a valid license for we saw 2.5 years valid. And so the family understandably gets upset. You know, it's like my neighbor gets popped for a .09 DWI, and they're revoked in 7 days. This guy killed my family, and they're on a valid license. Huge rub. So what the legislature did in 2014 is give you a ton of authority. I'm sure some of you know this law. I suspect some don't. This is not that well known. It's found in chapter 629. Again, you'll have the PowerPoint. But it basically says you as a peace officer have the authority. In fact, it says the officer shall. But it's whenever you believe that there's probable cause that this driver violated alcohol or drug CVO, not the no alcohol gross negligence, not the hit and run from a fatal crash, but alcohol or drug, so clauses 2 through 6. Once you hold that belief, you should, in fact, like I said, it says shall report that belief to the Commissioner of Public Safety. Huge authority. And so the way that that's done is through echarging. So it might be that night. You and your partner might come back to the station and go, we definitely have injured or dead victims. The driver's clearly at fault. We've got good evidence, physical evidence, we've got witnesses, and I don't need a test result to know that driver's impaired. I got everything I need. You might want to do this the night of the crash. Or, like in the case of Rochester PD recently, I don't know, not so sure. I'm going to wait for that test result to come back. No problem, because it's your belief. But whenever you hold that belief, you want to submit this probable cause, CVO Peace Officer certification. And I'll just show you how quick this is to do. So just like everything else, create new e-charging form. Now, you've already obtained your search warrant, CVO or homicide. You're not going to do a DWI, but here's the CVO form wizard. You open that up, and this is seconds of work. Just like the DWI, you look up your driver, you select your driver, and boom, that's all the information needed. You save and continue. Needs a little information about the crash itself. So what's the case number? What's the date and time of the crash? What's the location of the crash, whatever that is. City, we'll say Elk River, and Sherburne County. Boom, done, save and continue. So basic driver and incident information, and then it brings you to this basically check the box page. And this is right out of statute. And whether you check one box or multiple boxes, it's the same level of authority. One triggers everything. So, like I said, that night you might go, yep, I do believe, yep, this driver hurt or killed somebody, they were negligent, and they're under the influence of something. Boom, done, check mark. Or maybe you waited for the test result to come back. But in any event, you make the selection that represents your belief, you save and continue, and now it says scroll down to sign and submit, and so we'll sign this with a password. And the moment that I sign it, it's transmitted. And so in just a moment, there it is, successfully sent to DVS. And so this does not go through record staff. It's directly from you to the Department of Public Safety. And there's 3 ladies that work that are kind of our e-charging group at DVS. They are exceptional, best I've ever worked with. They are conscientious, attention to detail, and they will act on that at 8 o'clock tomorrow, guaranteed. In fact, I had a dyno officer say, I sent it at like midnight, and they were on it at like 8. They understand how important this is. So This is submitted to DPS, make a copy for your agency, and what public safety does in response to your certification, after you go through that quick step-by-step process, is they suspend that driver. And this is one from a fatal in southeast Minnesota. You can see the driver suspended in the small print you probably can't read. It's the date that the peace officer sent the certification in, and then it says, do not reinstate the driver, suspension is pending the outcome of a criminal matter. And so what Driver and Vehicle Services does is they send, based on your belief, they send the driver a letter like this. This is one that's recent, it's just redacted, and you can see the letter is issued, sent on November 5th, and the suspension goes into effect on November 21. So they do have to give a required number of days notice that that driver will then be suspended. Of course, people drive without a valid license all the time, but at least you can tell that family, we've done everything in our legal power to invalidate that driver. So it's a really powerful tool for those heart-wrenching crashes. Any questions on that? Oh, yes, sir, I'm sorry.
Are they gonna link the CBO portion like they do with the regular DWI stuff, so you do the warrants right out of the CBO, like we do with the DWIs?
I'm kind of missing that.
You have your CBO section that we check, and we just fill in all that stuff. We do the DWI, we can go right into the search warrant. Are they gonna link it up so we can go right into a search warrant, eventually right into the CBO?
No, because you're going to want to do the search warrant first.
Okay.
This is going to be done later. And to some degree, it's at your convenience, but more importantly, it's done whenever you hold that belief. There were a couple of developers that asked the same thing. I said, no, the search warrant is the most critical. This has a priority, but not near as much as getting that blood sample. Any other questions? Okay. Just a general reminder, go into your user account once a year, once in a while. Encourage your peers to do that in your agency. Click the preferences tab. Just make sure your email address and your badge and rank and all that is up to date, your post license expiration and so forth. When you click the preferences tab, over on the left side of the screen, I'm sure some of you are already signed up for this, but you can click subscriptions and then click the word edit, and you're given all sorts of different notification options for criminal complaints. But under the DWI area for peace officers, I always have them select install DWI, and then this one right here, BCA lab report. So when your BCA lab report does get sent to the agency, there's somebody in your agency that gets those, you'll also get that email, which gives you the hyperlink back. It's just a nice convenience, and that's what makes sure that you get that notification. We talked about documents, enough on that. Do you save the entire PDF when you're done with it? Like once you've attached your report, you save that, so all the DWI forms are saved in your record system? Good. And that's good. Most agencies do, because echarging only retains it for 2 years. You probably have like a 7-year retention period. Okay. I'm sure you have sometimes probably even swore at these, but you get these email notices about a DWI being installed. The most important thing to say is that it does not mean you've done something wrong. They're set up so that if a refusal or a test failure, breath test failure, has not been published within 5 days, remember the driver needs to be revoked on day 7, it sends the email out basically saying, hey, this thing needs to move along. Now, if you've